What does a simple act of kindness truly cost? For Chloe, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt and family medical bills, it cost half of her only meal for the day, a meager tuna sandwich. She gave it to a disheveled, weary man who stumbled into her diner, a man who looked like he'd hit rock bottom. She expected nothing in return. It was a simple human gesture she'd forget by her next double shift. She never imagined that man was Jasper Knight, a reclusive billionaire investor, famous for his ruthless tactics, who was conducting a secret personal test. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how half a sandwich bought something money never could, and how one small act of generosity in a rundown Chicago diner triggered an avalanche that would change lives, expose secrets, and challenge the very meaning of wealth and character. The air in the Silver Spoon Diner was a permanent greasy tapestry, woven from the scents of stale coffee, sizzling bacon, and the faint, sweet perfume of maple syrup that clung to the cracked red vinyl of the booths. For Chloe Peterson, this aroma was the smell of survival. It was the smell of another 16-hour double shift of tired feet crammed into worn-out sneakers, and of the constant humming anxiety that lived in the pit of her stomach. At 24, her life was a repeating cycle of taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and calculating how to stretch the crumpled bills in her tip jar to cover her mother's ever-growing pile of medical expenses and the rent on their tiny, drafty apartment. Her manager, Mr. Harrison, a man whose smile was as thin as his hairline, patrolled the checkered floor like a warden. He had a hawk's eye for any perceived infraction, a coffee pot left on the burner too long, a conversation with a customer that lingered a second pass transactional, or his personal favorite, a server taking a moment to catch their breath. "Peterson!" He barked from across the diner, his voice cutting through the morning chatter. "Table 7 needs a check. You're not getting paid to daydream." Chloe flinched, her shoulders tightening. "On it, Mr. Harrison," she called back, forcing a bright customer service smile that felt like a mask. She quickly settled the bill for a family of tourists, her mind already racing ahead. "Okay, that's another $6.50 in tips. After I set aside the bus fare that leaves, not enough. It's never enough." Her mother Maria had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder 6 months ago. The insurance from her previous job had run out, and Chloe's diner wages were a single leaky bucket trying to catch a waterfall of debt. Every day was a tightrope walk over a chasm of financial ruin. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that made her bones ache more than the long hours on her feet. Her younger brother Ben was a brilliant kid with a scholarship offer to the University of Illinois, but even with the scholarship, the remaining costs for books and board were a mountain she didn't know how to climb for him. His dream felt as distant as her own. It was just past 2:00 p.m., the brief lull between the chaotic lunch rush and the early dinner crowd. Chloe finally had a moment to herself. She slipped into the last booth at the back, the one near the steamy kitchen doors, and unwrapped her lunch. It was the same as yesterday, and the day before a tuna salad sandwich on cheap white bread. She'd made a large batch of the filling on Sunday to last her the week. It was bland utilitarian, but it was food. As she lifted the first half to her mouth, the bell above the diner door jingled. The man who entered didn't so much walk as shuffle. He was tall but stooped, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. His clothes, a frayed trench coat, rumpled trousers, and scuffed shoes looked like they'd been slept in for a week. His face was obscured by a shaggy, overgrown beard and hair that hadn't seen a comb in days, but Chloe could see the deep-set exhaustion in his eyes. They were a startlingly clear blue, but they were hollow lost. He scanned the room, seeming almost fearful of the handful of remaining customers before his gaze landed on the empty counter. He moved towards it, slowly, hesitating with each step. Brenda, the senior waitress who'd been working at the Spoon for 15 years and possessed a heart hardened by 1,000 sob stories, took one look at him and rolled her eyes. "Not on my watch," she muttered to Chloe as she passed. "He's got no cash and a long story written all over him. Harrison will throw him out before he even sits down." Chloe watched the man. He wasn't looking at the menu. He was staring at the display case of day-old pies with a raw, desperate hunger that twisted something in her chest. Mr. Harrison was already marching out from his office, his face set in a familiar scowl of disapproval. He was about to intercept the man. Chloe didn't think. She just acted. She slid out of her booth, her own sandwich clutched in her hand. "Mr. Harrison, I've got this one," she said, quickly stepping in front of her manager. "Why don't you go check the inventory? I think we're low on napkins." Harrison gave her a suspicious glare, but seeing the potential for a confrontation to be avoided without his direct involvement, he grunted and veered off toward the storeroom. Chloe approached the man, keeping her voice soft. "Hi there," she said, offering a small, tentative smile. "Tough day?" The man looked up, startled, as if he was surprised to be spoken to. He just nodded, his gaze dropping back to the floor. He seemed to carry an aura of profound loneliness. "Can I get you something?" Chloe asked gently. "A cup of coffee, maybe?" He shook his head, a barely perceptible motion. "Don't have," he began, his voice a dry rasp, before trailing off as if the effort was too much. Chloe understood. She looked from his haunted eyes down to the sandwich in her hand. It was half a sandwich, her only food until she got home after 10 p.m. Every calorie was fuel she needed to survive the next 8 hours of hustling, smiling, and running. Giving it away was in a small but significant way a sacrifice. It meant her own hunger would be sharper, her fatigue heavier. But then she looked at his face again and saw a reflection of the desperation she felt every single day, just magnified 100 times. "Here," she said, holding it out to him. "You look like you need this more than I do." The man stared at the sandwich, then at her, his blue eyes widening in disbelief. He seemed to be searching her face for a catch, for the punchline to a cruel joke. He saw only simple, unadorned sincerity. "Why?" He rasped the word, cracking with disuse. Chloe shrugged, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "Because my mum always said that you never know what battle someone else is fighting. And sometimes all a person needs is to know they're not invisible." She pushed the sandwich into his hand. "Please, take it." He slowly took the wax paper wrapped, half his fingers brushing against hers. His hand was calloused and rough, but there was a strange stillness in his touch. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking at the offering. He didn't say, "Thank you." He just gave her one last, long, searching look, a look of such intensity, it felt like he was peering directly into her soul, before turning and shuffling back out the door, disappearing into the grey Chicago afternoon. Chloe watched him go, a strange mix of satisfaction and gnawing emptiness in her stomach. Well, wasn't that a touching scene from a charity telethon? Brenda's sarcastic voice cut in from behind her. "You know Harrison would have your hide if he saw you giving away food, right? That tuna salad comes out of your paycheck, you know." "It was just half a sandwich, Brenda," Chloe said quietly, heading back to her station. "Yeah, well," Brenda scoffed, wiping down the counter with a vengeance. "In your situation, kid half a sandwich is a luxury item. Hope you enjoyed your little act of charity. It won't pay your mum's hospital bills." Brenda's words stung because they were true. As Chloe went back to work, the hunger pangs started sharp and insistent. She tried to ignore them, focusing on the rhythm of the job, take the order, pour the coffee, clear the plates. But a seed of doubt had been planted. Was it a foolish, sentimental gesture? She had her own battles to fight, her own family to save. For the rest of her shift, as she smiled at customers and bantered with regulars like old Mr. Peterson, she couldn't shake the image of the man's hollow eyes or the unsettling feeling that her small, simple act had set something much larger into motion. The days following the encounter with the stranger bled into one another, each a near-identical copy of the last. Chloe worked worried and slept in a repeating, exhausting loop. The memory of the man and his hollow eyes faded, smoothed over by the more immediate pressures of her life. The hospital called with a new updated bill for her mother's latest treatment, the figure so high it made Chloe feel dizzy. Ben called from his part-time job at the library, his voice strained as he mentioned the fast-approaching deadline to pay his student housing deposit. The weight on Chloe's shoulders grew heavier with each passing hour. Brenda's cynical words echoed in her mind during the hungriest moments of her shifts. Half a sandwich is a luxury item. Chloe started rationing her food even more strictly, her own hunger. A constant, dull ache that served as a reminder of her precarious situation. She began to regret her impulsive act of charity, not because she wished the man ill, but because her own needs were so overwhelming. It felt like she'd given away one of the few planks, keeping her own head above water. Mr. Harrison, too, seemed to have a renewed vigor for tormenting her. "Peterson, you missed a spot on table 4, he'd snap. "Peterson, that customer has had an empty water glass for 45 seconds. He seemed to take a perverse pleasure in her fatigue, as if her exhaustion was a personal victory for him. One particularly grueling Thursday, about a week after the sandwich incident, Chloe was clearing the back booth where she'd sat that day. As she gathered the salt and pepper shakers and the sticky syrup dispenser, her fingers brushed against something cool and metallic, lodged deep in the crack of the vinyl seat. Curious, she dug it out. It wasn't a quarter or a dime. It was a coin, but unlike any she had ever seen. It was heavy, made of a dark, almost black metal, with a lustrous sheen. It was slightly larger than a silver dollar. On one side, there was a detailed engraving of a solitary leafless tree on a hill, its branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. There were no words, no numbers, no date. On the other side was a single, intricately designed letter K, with a knight's helmet integrated into the top of the letter. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. It felt ancient and important. Chloe turned it over and over in her palm. It couldn't have been from the tourists or the family she'd served since. The booth had been wiped down dozens of times. It had to have been him. The strange, silent man. She slipped it into the front pocket of her apron, her heart thumping a little faster. It wasn't money, but it was something. A puzzle. What was it? Some kind of token, a good luck charm. Throughout the rest of her shift, she kept touching it through the thin fabric of her apron, the cool, heavy weight, a tangible link to the odd encounter. That evening, as she was cashing out, Mr. Harrison cornered her by the register. "Peterson," he began, his tone oily. "We need to talk about your performance." Chloe's stomach dropped. "Is there a problem, sir?" "Your pace has been slowing," he said, consulting a clipboard with a self-important air. "And Brenda mentioned you were donating diner property to vagrants last week." Chloe's face flushed. Of course Brenda had told him. "It was half of my own sandwich, Mr. Harrison. It didn't belong to the diner." "It's about the image, Peterson," he hissed, leaning closer. "We are a respectable establishment, not a soup kitchen. We can't have you encouraging that sort of clientele. It's bad for business." He paused for effect. "I'm cutting your hours. Starting next week, you're off the weekend rotation." The words hit her like a physical blow. The weekends were where she made the bulk of her tips. Without them, she wouldn't even be able to cover rent, let alone the medical bills or Ben's deposit. "Mr. Harrison, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "I can't. I need those hours. My mother is sick." "That's not my problem," he said, coldly turning away. "Be more professional. Maybe you'll earn them back." Chloe walked home in a daze, tears of frustration and helplessness blurring the city lights. Brenda's mockery, her manager's cruelty, the ever-present mountain of debt, it all felt like it was finally crashing down on her. The act of kindness that had felt so right in the moment now seemed like the height of foolishness, the trigger for this latest disaster. She let herself into the small apartment she shared with her mother. Maria was asleep in her room, her breathing shallow. Chloe looked at the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, a white paper monster that grew larger every day. Defeated, she sank onto the lumpy sofa and pulled the strange coin from her pocket. She stared at the leafless tree and the knight's helmet. It was a bizarre, useless object, a memento of a mistake. She thought about the man. Why leave this? Was it a joke, a trinket he'd found? She felt a surge of anger at him, at her own naivety, at the world that rewarded cruelty and punished a simple act of compassion. Driven by a mix of desperation and curiosity, she went to her laptop. What could she even search for? Heavy black coin with tree and knight helmet. Letter K coin. It felt absurd. She started typing. She tried various combinations, scrolling through pages of coin collector forums and fantasy game memorabilia. Nothing matched. It was useless. She was about to give up when she tried a different approach. She searched for Knight Helmet Logo K. The search results were mostly for sports teams and medieval fairs, but then buried on the second page was a link to a Business Journal article from 5 years ago. The headline read, "The Enigmatic Knight Jasper Knight and the Rise of Knight Enterprises." Her finger trembled as she clicked the link. The article was a deep dive into a notoriously private, almost mythical figure in the world of high finance. Jasper Knight, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar investment empire from nothing. He was known for his unorthodox methods, his uncanny ability to see value where no one else could, and his absolute refusal to engage with the media. The article mentioned his company logo, a symbol he had designed himself, described as a stylized letter K, integrated with a knight's helmet. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She frantically searched for images of Jasper Knight. There were very few, most of them grainy, long-lens shots from years ago. In them, he was clean-shaven with sharp features and intense, piercing blue eyes, his dark hair impeccably styled. He looked nothing like the haggard man from the diner. But then, she found a more recent article, a gossip piece, speculating on his well-being after he had dropped out of public view over a year ago following a personal tragedy, the sudden death of his wife. The article featured a single blurry photo of a man leaving a building, his face obscured by a beard. His shoulders slumped. It was him. Chloe stared at the screen, her mind reeling. The man she had given half a sandwich to was not a homeless person. He was Jasper Knight, a billionaire. The coin in her hand suddenly felt 10 times heavier. This wasn't a random trinket. It was a symbol. His symbol. But what did it mean? Why was he dressed like that? Why was he in a place like the Silver Spoon Diner? And why had he left his personal mark behind for her? A waitress who had shown him a sliver of kindness. The mystery of the man in the diner had just exploded into 1,000 new questions, each one more bewildering than the last. Her world, which had felt so small and suffocating just moments before, had suddenly been cracked wide open. The revelation that the disheveled stranger was the billionaire Jasper Knight sent Chloe's world spinning off its axis. For 2 days, she existed in a state of suspended disbelief. She would pull the heavy coin from her pocket 12 times an hour, tracing the lines of the tree and the knight's helmet, half convinced she had imagined the whole thing. Was it a test, a bizarre social experiment, or was he simply a broken man wandering the city in a grief-stricken haze, and their encounter meant nothing more than what it was? She told no one. How could she? Telling her best friend Olivia would sound like a delusional fantasy. Telling Brenda would earn her endless ridicule. And the thought of Mr. Harrison finding out was mortifying. So she kept the secret locked away, a humming electric current beneath the surface of her daily drudgery. Her reduced hours at the diner began, and the financial impact was immediate and devastating. The weekend shifts, which had been her lifeline, were gone. Her weekly take-home pay was slashed by nearly half. The knot of anxiety in her stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. The final demand for Ben's housing deposit arrived in the mail stamped in red ink. She had 10 days. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Chloe was on her break, nursing a cup of free coffee, and trying not to think about the fact that she couldn't afford a real lunch. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the billing department of her mother's hospital. Chloe's heart sank. She braced herself for another reminder of her overdue balance. She opened the email, her eyes scanning the text for the terrifying dollar amount, but the words she read made no sense. Subject account payment confirmation. Dear Ms. Peterson. This email is to confirm that a payment of 5,000 DSX has been credited to the account of Maria Peterson. This payment was made anonymously via a third-party charitable fund. Your current outstanding balance has been adjusted accordingly. Thank you. Chloe read the email 3 times. $5,000. It was an impossible sum. An anonymous donation. Her mind raced. Maybe it was a church group or a mistaken transfer. She immediately thought of the coin of Jasper Knight. Could it be no, that was crazy? It had to be a coincidence, a clerical error that would soon be cruelly rectified. She spent the rest of her shift waiting for a follow-up email, explaining the mistake, but none came. The next day she called the hospital's billing department, her voice trembling. A polite but firm administrator confirmed the payment. It was real. It was anonymous. There was no mistake. Hanging up the phone, Chloe felt a wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. It wasn't a solution to all her problems, but it was a reprieve. It was breathing room. It was a miracle. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling it was connected to him. The timing was too perfect. But the thought was so outlandish, she pushed it away. Rich people didn't go around secretly paying the hospital bills of waitresses they met once. A few days later, another strange thing happened. Ben called her, his voice bursting with excitement. "Chloe, you are not going to believe this," he shouted into the phone. "I don't know how, I don't know why, but it happened." Ben, slow down. What happened? "The university housing office, they just called me. They said an endowment was just set up. A new one. It's called the North Star Scholarship Grant. It's specifically for students in my program with demonstrated financial need. And they awarded it to me. It covers the entire housing deposit and a book stipend for the first semester. Chloe, I can go. I can actually go." Chloe sank onto her couch, speechless. The North Star Scholarship, a brand new endowment that appeared out of thin air, just in time to save her brother's dream. This was too much to be a coincidence. The leafless tree on the coin, it reached for the sky, like it was reaching for the stars. The North Star. It had to be him. Jasper Knight. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. He was out there somewhere, pulling strings, changing her life from a distance. But why for half a sandwich? It didn't add up. It felt disproportionate, grandiose, unsettling. It was like a god had noticed her and decided to meddle in her affairs. This wasn't just charity. It was a display of power. He was showing her what he was capable of. This realization didn't bring pure joy. Instead, it brought a complex mix of gratitude and fear. She was being watched. Her life, her struggles had become a project for a reclusive billionaire. Was she just a curiosity to him, a way to assuage his own grief or boredom? The anonymity of his actions was a shield for him, but it left her feeling exposed and powerless. The ripples of his influence continued. Her mother's doctor called, mentioning that a specialist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, a doctor they could never have afforded, had reviewed Maria's case and suggested a new experimental treatment not yet covered by most insurance plans. The specialist was offering to oversee the treatment pro bono as part of a research grant. Another coincidence. Another anonymous, life-altering intervention. While her family's fortunes were mysteriously turning, her own situation at the diner grew worse. Emboldened by her lack of protest over the cut hours, Mr. Harrison became even more tyrannical. He scheduled her for split shifts, 4 hours in the morning and 4 at night, with a long, unpaid gap in between that made it impossible to get another job. Brenda, seeing the positive changes in Chloe's life without knowing their source, grew more resentful. "Must be nice," she sneered one afternoon, after Chloe mentioned her mother was starting a new treatment. "Wonder who you've got looking out for you. Did you win the lottery and forget to tell the rest of us peasants? It's not like that." "Brenda," Chloe said, her voice quiet. "Sure it isn't," Brenda retorted, walking away. The contrast was jarring. Her world outside the diner was being secretly repaired by an invisible benefactor, while her world inside it was crumbling under the petty tyranny of her boss and the jealousy of her co-worker. She felt trapped between two realities. One evening, after a particularly humiliating shift, where Harrison had reprimanded her in front of a full dining room for dropping a fork, Chloe reached a breaking point. She couldn't live like this anymore, waiting for the other shoe to drop, living on handouts from a man she didn't know and couldn't thank. She had to take back control. She went home, took out the heavy black coin, and stared at it. The knight's helmet. Knight Enterprises. She made a decision. She wasn't going to wait for him to make the next move. She was going to find him. She didn't know what she would say, thank you, or leave me alone, or maybe both. But she had to face the man who was playing God with her life. She had to understand why. Taking a deep breath, she opened her laptop and searched for the address of Knight Enterprises' corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago. It was time to find the ghost in the machine. The Knight Enterprises building was not just a skyscraper. It was a statement. A sleek obsidian tower that pierced the Chicago skyline. It seemed to absorb the light around it, exuding an aura of immense, untouchable power. It was a world away from the sticky floors and greasy air of the Silver Spoon Diner. As Chloe stood across the street, clutching the strap of her worn purse, she felt a profound sense of intimidation. Her simple plan to find him suddenly felt naive and foolish. Dressed in her best and only interview outfit, a simple black skirt, and a slightly faded blouse, she felt as out of place as a sparrow in an eagle's nest. Security guards with stern faces and earpieces stood watch by the revolving glass doors. This wasn't a place you could just walk into. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she crossed the street and walked through the doors. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and cold minimalist art. The air was silent, save for the soft tapping of keyboards from a large circular reception desk that sat in the center of the vast space like a command hub. A woman with impeccably styled silver hair and a crisp designer suit looked up as Chloe approached. Her nameplate read, Evelyn Reed, Executive Assistant. Her smile was polite, but impenetrable. "Can I help you?" Ms. Reed asked, her voice smooth and professional. Yes," Chloe stammered, feeling her confidence evaporate under the woman's cool gaze. I need to see Mr. Knight." Evelyn Reed's smile didn't falter, but her eyes held a flicker of amusement. "I'm sorry Mr. Knight doesn't take unscheduled appointments. Do you have a meeting?" "No, I don't. But it's personal. It's very important." "I'm sure it is," Miss Reed said, her tone suggesting she heard this a dozen times a day. "If you'd like to leave a message or submit a business proposal through the proper channels." "No, you don't understand," Chloe insisted, her desperation rising. "He'll want to see me." She fumbled in her purse and pulled out the heavy black coin. She placed it on the marble countertop between them. "Please just show him this. Tell him the waitress from the Silver Spoon Diner is here." Evelyn Reed's professional mask finally slipped. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked at the coin. She stared at it for a long moment, her composure momentarily fractured. She then looked up at Chloe, her expression shifting from polite dismissal to sharp, focused curiosity. Without another word, she picked up her phone, pressed a single button, and spoke in a low, hushed voice. "Sir, you have a visitor." "Yes, sir. She calls herself the waitress from the Silver Spoon, and she has one of your tokens." There was a long pause. Chloe could hear the faint, muffled sound of a man's voice on the other end. Evelyn Reed listened intently, her eyes fixed on Chloe. "Yes, sir," she finally said. "I'll bring her up immediately." She hung up the phone and stood. "Follow me, please, Miss Peterson." The fact that she knew her name sent a fresh jolt through Chloe. He hadn't just been watching her finances, he had been watching her. The private elevator they entered was silent and swift, ascending with a stomach-lurching speed. It opened not into a hallway, but directly into a massive corner office that seemed to float above the city. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of Chicago and Lake Michigan. The space was sparsely furnished with a huge oak desk, a few leather chairs and shelves filled with books, not awards. And standing by the window, his back to them, was a man. He was tall and wore a perfectly tailored grey suit. As he turned, Chloe's breath caught. It was him. The sharp features, the dark hair now neatly trimmed the clean-shaven jaw, but the eyes were the same startlingly clear blue, but they were no longer hollow and lost. They were sharp, intelligent, and intensely focused on her. This was Jasper Knight, not in disguise, but in his full, formidable power. "Ms. Reed, thank you. That will be all," he said, his voice a calm, deep baritone that held an unmistakable authority. Evelyn Reed gave a slight nod and exited the elevator doors, closing with a soft hiss, leaving Chloe alone with the billionaire. "Ms. Peterson," Jasper Knight said, his gaze unwavering. "Chloe, I must admit I didn't expect you to seek me out." You've been helping me," Chloe said, the words coming out as a shaky accusation. "The hospital bill, my brother's scholarship, my mother's doctor." "I have," he admitted without apology. "I made some inquiries." "Why?" She asked the question that had been tormenting her for weeks. "Why me? Because I gave you half a sandwich." He walked slowly from the window towards his desk, but didn't sit behind it. Instead, he leaned against the edge, creating a sense of intimacy that was at odds with the grandeur of the room. "That sandwich," he began, his voice softening slightly, "was more than a sandwich. Do you know where I was in my life when I walked into your diner?" "Chloe," Chloe shook her head, mesmerized by his intensity. My wife Catherine passed away a year ago. He said, his voice laced with a profound, unhealed sorrow. She was the North Star of my life, the only person who saw Jasper, not Jasper Knight. After she was gone, the world became noise. Deals, numbers, expectations. Empty. I lost my bearings. So I walked away from it all. I wanted to see if there was anything genuine left in the world, or if it was all just transactions. He gestured around the opulent office. This is a fortress. People approach me because they want something. Money, power, access. Their kindness is an investment. For months I wandered the city. I made myself invisible. I wanted to see people as they truly are. And day after day, I saw nothing but indifference. People averting their eyes, stepping around me, treating me as less than human. He looked directly at her, and Chloe felt that same soul-piercing gaze she remembered from the diner. And then I walked into the Silver Spoon. I had no money. I looked like I had nothing to offer anyone. Your co-worker dismissed me on sight. Your boss was ready to throw me out. But you looked at me, and you saw a person. You were tired, you were struggling. I could see it in your eyes. And yet you took your own meal, a meal I knew you needed, and you gave half of it to me. You asked for nothing in return. You said, sometimes all a person needs is to know they're not invisible. In that moment, you gave me more than tuna on bread. You gave me a glimmer of hope. You reminded me of the world my wife always believed in. Chloe was speechless, overwhelmed by the raw honesty of his confession. All her theories about tests and social experiments dissolved, replaced by the simple, staggering truth of a grieving man searching for a reason to believe again. The coin, she whispered. The token. My father was a blacksmith. Jasper said, a faint nostalgic smile touching his lips. He taught me that a person's mark should mean something. That was a token I had made for my wife, based on a drawing she loved. I only made 2. I carry one and I left the other for you. It was an impulse, a marker. A promise to myself that such genuine, uncalculated kindness would not go unrewarded. He pushed himself off the desk and walked closer. The anonymous help was my way of saying thank you without complicating your life. But it appears I underestimated your resolve. You changed my life, Chloe said, finding her voice. You saved my family. But I can't just live on secret handouts. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like my own life. Jasper Knight nodded slowly, a look of profound respect in his eyes. I thought you might feel that way. It's why I was hoping you would come. Because a handout was never my intention. What I have in mind is not charity. He paused, his blue eyes locking onto hers. It's an investment. The word investment hung in the air of the vast office, charged with a meaning far beyond what Chloe could have anticipated. She had expected a check, a formal thank you, perhaps a clean break. But an investment suggested a partnership, a future, a test. An investment? She echoed, her voice barely a whisper. In what? Jasper walked over to a sleek, modern credenza and pressed a hidden panel. A screen silently descended from the ceiling. With a few taps on a tablet, he projected an image onto it. It was a photograph of a charming but clearly defunct brick storefront. The windows were boarded up. The paint was peeling, but it had good bones. A classic corner spot in a gentrifying neighborhood she recognized not far from her own. The faded sign above the door read, O'Malley's Bakery. I had my research team look into you, Chloe. Jasper explained, his tone shifting from personal to professional. I know you're more than a waitress. I know you bake for your church fundraisers. I know your grandmother taught you all her recipes. And I know you have a notebook hidden under your bed filled with ideas for a bakery you dream of opening one day. A place called The Giving Loaf. Chloe stared at him, stunned into silence. He knew about her secret dream, the one she'd never spoken aloud to anyone but her mother. He knew its name. The level of his investigation was both unnerving and astonishing. She felt completely transparent, every hidden hope laid bare. "That location," he said, pointing to the screen, "is available. I can acquire it. I can provide the capital for a complete renovation, top-of-the-line equipment, and 6 months of operating costs. I am offering you the chance to build the Giving Loaf from the ground up." It was a staggering offer, a fantasy made real, but Chloe could see the shrewdness in his eyes. This was not a gift. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice steady despite the wild beating of her heart. "There's no catch," Jasper replied. "But there are conditions. This is Knight Enterprises, not a charity foundation. I am an investor. I am investing in you, Chloe, in your character, your work ethic, your dream. But dreams don't pay returns. Business plans do." He swiped the screen, and it was now filled with a daunting list of deliverables, a comprehensive 10-year business plan, market analysis, profit and loss projections, a staffing model, a full marketing strategy. "You will have access to my resources," he continued, "my financial analysts, my marketing team, my legal department. They will answer your questions, but they will not do the work for you. You will be the project lead. You have 3 months to present a viable plan to my board of directors. If they approve it, the funding is yours. If they don't—" He let the sentence hang in the air. The immensity of the challenge crashed down on her. She was a waitress. She knew how to balance plates, not balance sheets. She knew recipes, not revenue models. The world he was offering her was a foreign country with a language she didn't speak. Self-doubt, cold and sharp, pierced through the initial euphoria. I don't know how to do any of that," she confessed, her gaze dropping to the floor. "You learned how to survive on 16-hour shifts while caring for a sick mother and supporting your brother," Jasper said firmly. "You learned how to manage your time, your money, and your energy under extreme pressure. You have more grit and resilience than half the Ivy League MBAs I've interviewed. You can learn this." He paused. "The question is, do you want to—" Chloe looked up at him, at the unwavering belief in his eyes. He wasn't just offering her money. He was offering her a chance to prove that she was more than her circumstances. He was betting on her. It was the biggest test of her life, and it was terrifying. But the alternative, going back to Mr. Harrison, to the split shifts, to the slow, grinding hopelessness, was even more frightening. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and resolved. "Yes, I want to." The next 3 months were a blur of intense, caffeine-fueled work. Chloe quit her job at the Silver Spoon Diner, an act that felt like shedding a heavy, suffocating skin. Jasper set her up in a small, temporary office in the Knight Enterprises, building a world away from her usual perch in the corner of the executive floor. It was here that the real work began. She met with stern-faced accountants who spoke in a rapid-fire language of amortization and depreciation. She sat with bright young marketing analysts who talked about target demographics and social media engagement. At first it was overwhelming. She would leave the tower late at night, her head swimming with terms she didn't understand, feeling like an imposter destined to fail. But every morning she came back. She brought a thermos of coffee and her grandmother's notebook, its pages filled with recipes for sourdough brioche and challah. She treated the business plan like the most complex recipe she had ever attempted, breaking it down into small, manageable steps. She read business books voraciously. She asked endless questions, ignoring the condescending smirks from some of the junior analysts who clearly saw her as the boss's pet project. She found an unexpected ally in Evelyn Reed Jasper's silver-haired assistant. Evelyn, who had initially been so dismissive, now treated Chloe with a quiet respect. She would often stop by Chloe's office with a cup of tea, offering practical advice on corporate etiquette and helping her navigate the complex internal politics of the company. "Don't let these boys in their $1,000 suits intimidate you," Evelyn told her one afternoon. "They know numbers. You know people. Mr. Knight is betting on that." The biggest challenge, however, came from an unexpected source. Word of Chloe's sudden change in fortune had inevitably trickled out. Brenda from the diner somehow found her contact information and left a series of bitter, resentful voicemails. But the true sabotage came from Mr. Harrison. Hearing that a former waitress was being bankrolled by a billionaire to open a bakery in a prime location enraged him. He saw it as a personal insult. He began a quiet smear campaign, contacting local food suppliers he worked with, telling them that Chloe was unreliable, that her project was just the whim of a rich man, and would fold in 6 months, and warning them not to do business with her. When Chloe started making calls to source flour and yeast, she was met with a series of suspicious, non-committal responses. It took her a week to trace the poison back to its source. Instead of getting angry, Chloe got smart. She used the market research skills she was learning. She bypassed the large established suppliers Harrison worked with and sought out smaller local organic farms and mills. Her plan shifted. The Giving Loaf wouldn't just be a bakery, it would be a farm-to-table enterprise that supported local agriculture. It made her business plan stronger, more authentic, and more compelling. She was turning Harrison's petty act of revenge into a cornerstone of her brand. The night before the board meeting, Chloe didn't sleep. She sat in her small apartment, the lights of the city twinkling outside her presentation, spread across the kitchen table. Her mother, who was responding well to her new treatment and had a healthy color back in her cheeks, came and sat with her. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Maria said softly, placing a hand on Chloe's shoulder. "Not because of the fancy building or the money, because you didn't let fear stop you." Walking into the boardroom the next morning felt like walking into an arena. A long, polished mahogany table was surrounded by a dozen stern, unsmiling faces, the board of directors of Knight Enterprises. Jasper sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He was no longer her confidant. He was the investor-in-chief. Chloe took her place at the podium, her heart pounding against her ribs. She looked at the faces, staring back at her faces that held the power to make her dream a reality or shatter it into 1,000,000 pieces. She took a deep breath, looked directly at Jasper, and began. "Good morning," she said, her voice shaking only for a second before it found its strength. "My name is Chloe Peterson, and I'm here today to talk to you not just about bread, but about the business of building a community. Let me tell you about the Giving Loaf." Chloe spoke for 45 minutes, her voice gaining confidence with every slide. She didn't just present numbers and projections, she told a story. She spoke of her grandmother's hands, kneading dough, of the power of a shared meal to create connection, of her vision for a bakery that was also a neighborhood hub. She detailed her innovative, locally sourced supply chain, turning Mr. Harrison's attempted sabotage into a strategic advantage. She presented a pay-it-forward program, where for every 10 loaves sold, 1 would be donated to a local shelter, a direct echo of the kindness she had once been shown. She wasn't just pitching a business, she was pitching a philosophy. When she finished, the room was silent, The board members, a formidable group of seasoned executives and ruthless capitalists, looked at one another. One of them, a severe-looking man named Robert Maxwell, who was known for his brutal bottom-line mentality, leaned forward. "Ms. Peterson," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is all very heartwarming. But this is a boardroom, not a fundraiser. Your profit margins are tighter than industry standard due to this local sourcing and your donation program. How do you justify that to us as a sound investment?" Chloe's heart sank for a second before she remembered the late-night sessions with Jasper's analysts. She was ready. "Mr. Maxwell," she replied calmly, "you're right. In the short term, our margins are tighter. But what I'm proposing isn't just a bakery. It's a brand built on authenticity and community. That story, the local farms, the Give Back program, isn't just a feel-good measure. It's our primary marketing tool. In a city saturated with generic chains, we'll offer something real. That creates customer loyalty that you can't buy with a traditional advertising budget. Our customers won't just be buying bread, they'll be buying into an idea. That loyalty is what makes us a secure, long-term investment, not a short-term gamble." A murmur went through the room. Jasper Knight, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. "Are there any further questions for Ms. Peterson?" The room was quiet. "Very well," Jasper said. "The board will now vote. Chloe Ms. Reed will see you to the waiting area." The 10 minutes she spent in the adjoining lounge felt longer than the entire preceding 3 months. Finally the door opened. Jasper entered alone. He walked over to her, his face unreadable. "They were impressed with your grasp of the financials," he said evenly. And Chloe asked, her breath catching. A slow smile spread across Jasper's face. The vote was unanimous. "Welcome to the helm of the Giving Loaf, Chloe." Tears of joy and relief streamed down Chloe's face. It was real. It had all been real. 6 months later, the Giving Loaf opened its doors. The scent of fresh bread, rich coffee, and melting butter now filled the corner spot where O'Malley's had once stood derelict. The place was beautiful, with warm wood, exposed brick, and large windows that flooded the space with light. On the wall behind the counter was a simple, framed charcoal drawing of a leafless tree on a hill, a tribute to the symbol that had started it all. The bakery was an instant success. The story of its founding, combined with Chloe's incredible recipes, made it a media darling and a neighborhood favorite. People didn't just come for the sourdough, they came to be a part of the story. Chloe hired a staff of people who, like her, had been overlooked and underestimated, giving them the same chance she had been given. She made her best friend Olivia her general manager. Her brother Ben, home from his first semester at college, worked the register on weekends. Her mother Maria, now in remission, would often sit at a corner table, simply watching her daughter live her dream, her eyes filled with pride. One afternoon, a familiar figure appeared at the counter. It was Mr. Harrison. He looked smaller and greyer than she remembered, stripped of the petty authority of the diner. He didn't seem to recognize her at first in her crisp white baker's coat. "I'll just have a black coffee," he mumbled, avoiding her eyes. "Hello, Mr. Harrison," Chloe said, her voice gentle, devoid of malice. He looked up, startled. A flush of shame crept up his neck. "Peterson," he stammered. I see you did all right for yourself." "I did," she said, handing him a coffee and a small, warm pastry. "This is on the house." He stared at her, then at the pastry, bewildered by the kindness. He took it, mumbled a thank you, and scurried out, a man diminished by his own bitterness. Chloe felt no triumph, only a quiet sense of closure. Later that week, Jasper Knight walked in. He didn't arrive in a sleek black car, but on foot, dressed in a simple sweater and slacks. He stood in line with the other customers, taking in the bustling, happy scene Chloe had created. When he reached the counter, she smiled. "What can I get for the man who started it all?" "I think," he said, his blue eyes warm and full of genuine happiness, "I'd like to try a whole sandwich this time." They sat together at the corner table, the one her mother favored sharing a meal. The awkwardness of their first meetings was gone, replaced by the easy comfort of two people who had profoundly changed each other's lives. He was no longer just a billionaire investor, and she was no longer just a struggling waitress. They were partners, friends. The true reward, Chloe realized, wasn't the money or the bakery itself. It was the discovery of her own strength. It was the ability to provide for her family, to see the pride in her mother's eyes and the bright future in her brother's. It was the power to create a space that nourished a community, to pay forward the kindness she had been shown, and to build a life that was truly wholly her own. As she looked across the table at Jasper, she understood that the half of a sandwich she gave away that day wasn't a loss. It was the single greatest investment she had ever made. The story of Chloe and Jasper Knight is a powerful reminder that our true worth isn't measured by our bank account, but by our character. It shows that a single act of genuine selfless kindness can ripple outward, creating waves of change in ways we can never predict. Chloe didn't just get a lucky break, she was given an opportunity and rose to the occasion with grit and integrity, proving that the same heart that was good enough to share a meal was strong enough to build an empire. Her story challenges us to see the humanity in everyone we meet and to never underestimate the profound impact of our own small gestures. If this story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope and kindness can be found in the most unexpected places. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about the incredible things that happen when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things.